In my last video, I gave you all a final tour of my completed renovation and spoke about a lot of the good bits. Well, in this video, I'm going to be going the opposite way and speak about the bad bits. I'll be exposing the bad choices I made, things I did that I wish I didn't do, things I didn't do that I wish I did, and the lessons that I've learned along the way, so that if any of you are ever doing a renovation in the future, you can hopefully have these things in mind and avoid making the same mistakes that I made. I feel like this is something that everyone that has done any kind of renovation can relate to, but just doing the renovation was something that I regretted multiple times during the process. When doing a renovation, it's almost kind of guaranteed that things are not going to go to plan, and I'd say the two most common things that are not going to go to plan are the timeline. It'll probably end up taking longer than you think, and the costs. It'll probably end up being more expensive than you thought it was going to be. And when you're hit with those things, certainly when I was hit with those things, you start thinking, what have I done? Why am I doing this? And why did I even take this project on in the first place? I experienced this kind of regret multiple times throughout the renovation process and just thought I'd mention it up front, because I feel like when you see renovation content on social media, it's kind of portrayed as like a fantasy, really fun thing where you just end up with a house that you love that's exactly how you wanted it to be. And it can be that partially, but I feel like a lot of people leave out the part of the process where you're crying in the shower. And if the renovation's going particularly bad, you might not even have a shower to cry in, which is kind of a kick in both balls. Moving into tangible decisions that I regret with this renovation, one of the biggest ones that I'm coming to realize is that I should have got a dishwasher. This is kind of a common theme with my renovation regrets, in that it's permanent fixtures that are not easy or cheap to fix or change. When you put in something like a new kitchen or a new bathroom, the decisions that you make are pretty permanent and expensive. It's not like a cushion or a rug which you can change the size or color of at the drop of a hat. During the renovation, I kind of moved back in with my parents, and they do have a dishwasher, and going from that back to washing my dishes by hand is particularly painful. The thing that makes this regret burn so fiercely is that I did actually have room for a dishwasher, but I just didn't put one in. And this haunts me quite badly whenever I'm doing my dishes and I get the sleeves of my sweatshirt wet, so it's not good. Now, this next regret is not a permanent fixture that I cannot change, but it was a custom order which was quite expensive, so it's quite terrible that I don't actually like it all that much. I am speaking about the electric blinds in my living room in front of the patio doors. I think some thick curtains, maybe even a kind of double curtain where you have a thinner one behind it which you can still pull if you want the privacy of a curtain without blocking out too much light, would have been a much cozier option. It would have been much more functional, and I just think it would have looked much better as well. Pulling curtains is just so much quicker than these electric blinds as well, and if I ever need to go out the patio doors, I feel like curtains would have been much easier because I can kind of just open them and go out, whereas with the blinds, you have to kind of go around the side, and that feels kind of awkward and almost kind of feels like I'm going to damage the blinds when I do that. So the alternative is waiting half an hour for the electric blind to go up. If I could go back, I would certainly pay more attention to the usefulness of my decor choices rather than always focusing and prioritizing how they look. Although that doesn't really apply here, because in general, I think curtains look better than blinds. So I don't know what I was thinking here. Now, this next regret goes beyond just bad decor choices and is actually something that creeped me out a little bit, so let me explain. When I was moving house and starting the renovation, I had to put my details into a lot of different places, a lot of different websites. I had to update my contact information, I had to sort out my new bills for the new place, and I also had to apply for planning permission to actually start the renovation. Shortly after this, I started just getting absolutely bombarded with spam calls, texts, emails, and letters from companies trying to sell me everything from credit cards to renovation services. I couldn't really figure out what had happened at the time until I found out it was the result of all of my information, including my name, address, and the fact that I was doing a renovation, being freely accessed and sold on by data brokers. Having these companies spam me relentlessly with all of this information was bad enough, but beyond that, I realized that this meant my information was accessible to anyone. If someone didn't like one of my cat videos, they could look me up, find out where I live, and turn up and batter me. I mean, I can try. Thankfully, shortly after all of this mess unfolded, I found a service called Spongy, and they helped me clean up the whole mess and take back control of my data. And that's exactly why they're the sponsor of this video. So Spongy is a service that contacts data brokers on your behalf and gets your personal information removed from their databases. And they do this automatically. This saves you from spending hundreds of hours manually tracking and sending out removal requests, and it keeps working in the background to make sure your data stays off the market. Furthermore, if there are certain sites you especially don't trust, Spongy also has a custom removal feature which lets you personally flag and remove your data from specific sites you're most concerned about. So whether it's stopping identity theft, unwanted stalking, I've never heard of wanted stalking, or just finally putting a stop to those endless spam calls, it's a no-brainer to use Spongy. And with my link below and the code Dunnett, you'll get 60% off an annual plan. Now, coming back to physical regrets I have about my renovation, we have a decision that has me kicking myself. Because there was a limited space where we could put the shower in the bathroom, there was a suggestion at one point of knocking through the kind of shower wall and making a long shower tray. Because it's an old building and some of the parts of it have been found to be pretty wonky, I just did not like that idea at all, because I just felt like it was going to open a can of worms, like we'd crack open the wall and unveil a poltergeist or something. So instead, I decided to just stick with the bathroom and layout as it was and install a pretty small 800 by 800 shower tray. Now that I'm using this space, I'm realizing that I could have went a tiny little bit bigger, and I could have done it in a way that didn't actually affect any other part of the bathroom. Just outside the shower, there's this tiny little section of wall which is not being used, and if I'd wanted to, I could have got a thing called an offset shower, which just means it's slightly longer on that side. This would have added 10 centimeters to the shower, which isn't much, but you know, space is valuable when you're washing your particulars. Another option would have been getting a shower tray which was 10 centimeters bigger on both sides, but I wasn't very keen on this because it would have meant moving the vanity unit further along, and I quite like where the vanity unit is as it is. Where it is means that I can fit in the towel ring to the right, I can fit in a big plant in the corner, which I feel brings a really nice natural feel into the bathroom, which I really wanted. And having the vanity unit where it currently is means that the feature tile ends exactly at this angled section of the roof, which I think looks quite neat. I know the plant is negotiable, but I quite like just having the big plant there because I didn't want the kind of more clinical, polished hotel vibe of a bathroom. I wanted something just a bit different, and I feel like that kind of adds to it. So I like it. So yeah, whenever I'm in the bathroom and I notice this little section of useless wall that I could have made useful by putting in an offset tray, it kind of annoys me. I think the lesson here is, like the dishwasher, whenever it comes to permanent fixtures and decisions, really think about how practical everything is and buy a f***ing measuring tape. Annoyingly, one of the most expensive upgrades in the house has also ended up being one of the most frustrating regrets, because I've realized I could have done it in a much more optimal way. For those of you that followed along every step of the way, you'll know that halfway through the renovation, the old oil boiler completely died, meaning there was no heating in the house, so I had to pay £5,000 to get a new boiler put in. At the time, Hamish, my plumber, was not keen to put the boiler back in the same cupboard above the stairs next to the bathroom, because he felt it was just too dangerous and not very sensible. Instead, he said I should go with an outdoor boiler, but this would require lifting up the floorboards and, I believe, drilling through the bottom of the wall in the finished living room so that it could be linked up inside. I really didn't want to mess around with damage in the living room, so I kind of insisted that the new boiler go in the same cupboard that the old boiler was in. Fast forward to the end of the renovation, we ended up lifting the floor anyway to put in soundproofed flooring. Obviously, I didn't know we were going to do that when I insisted on the boiler going back in the same old place. I now know that if we had done the soundproofing at the same time, we could have easily had a much safer and more accessible boiler. The decoration damage from lifting up the floor wasn't even bad, and as a bonus, if I'd went with the outdoor boiler, it would have meant I would have had space in that cupboard to use it for whatever I wanted. I could have put a panic room in there. I actually think I might have been able to put a washing machine in there, and then I could have put a dishwasher where the washing machine is in my kitchen. So this is quite a hurtful regret. My next regret is the carpet on the stairway down to the front door. Initially, I'd planned to put this hard-wearing woven carpet down that my parents have next to the back door in their house. They actually had a roll of it left over, which would have been enough to do my stairs, and my mum said that I could have it for a discount. Just use code George's mum at checkout. However, because I had enough of my very luxurious bouncy carpet left over from my bedrooms, the carpet fitter suggested just using that for the stairs. I regret going with this because it's quite an absorbent carpet, and there is a risk that sometimes people might not be polite when they come into my house and not take off their clogs. So I think over time there's a risk that the carpet will get wrecked from that. I knew in my gut that I really wanted the hardware and carpet, but just in the moment when it was suggested to me, I kind of just rolled over and agreed, and that's something I would suggest none of you do. I'm not saying be a tyrant or like a nightmare customer, but if you have something in your head that you want it to work a certain way or look a certain way, then you have every right to bring that up and at least kind of push for it when you're paying good money for it. So I don't know. On this one, I was a bit of a spongy carpeted people pleaser. Okay, I have a confession. When it comes to tracking receipts and invoices and all that sort of thing, I just can't be fucked. And this has ended up biting me, so let me explain. Because doing and showing renovations on YouTube is kind of my job, it's not really a real job, I've found out that I can actually write off a lot of the bills and expenses related to that. I didn't know this was possible until I got a new accountant last year who is a bit more savvy with how to money launder as an influencer. That's just a joke, I'm not laundering any money. So I know it's quite a niche regret because not everyone who's doing a renovation will also be making content about it. Although I will say that you should do, because if it goes anywhere, the tax write-off, the brand deals, just kind of like building an audience, it's all there, it's all a possibility, and it's very cool if it works out. So I'd encourage everyone to give it a go if you're already doing a renovation. But yeah, even though this is quite a niche regret, which doesn't apply to everyone, it's still a regret nonetheless. Because if I'd been more on it with keeping and tracking every receipt and invoice, I could have saved myself quite a bit on my upcoming tax bills. I've learned my lesson though, and going forward, I'm going to be an absolute spreadsheet maniac. So in a similar vein, and to pull the curtain back a bit more on kind of the whole money side of being a renovation content creator, in hindsight, I actually sold myself short when it came to working with brands who want to sponsor videos to do with the renovation. Again, this is quite an unrelatable regret, so I'm going to try and make it a bit broader so that it applies to more people, and say that if you're a content creator or you make art, in fact, whatever your skill is in the world or in the workplace, I think it's important to check in with people in the same stratosphere as you so that you can learn what you're worth based on what they're charging and how they're making money. So for a particularly bad example of how much I sold myself short, early on in the renovation, I worked with a brand and they sponsored a video, and my payment for that video was receiving an item for free, and I think the item was worth like $300, so in actuality it probably cost the brand a lot less than that because it was like $300 retail. That's what they sold it for, and in return for that they got a video which ended up getting over 100,000 views. So they got that exposure, they got the content, and then they also used the content in their paid ads, all of which is not a good deal for $300. And I know that sounds ungrateful, but just knowing what I do know now about content creation and sponsorships and all of that, that wasn't a good deal. So shortly after that terrible display of bad businessmanship, I had a call with a YouTuber called Sarah Dici, who's just a very lovely and helpful person. And when I was telling her about some of the brand deals that I'd accepted, she was just like shaking her head on the call, and she ended up giving me some much better advice on what I should be charging, how I should be marketing myself, and ever since then things have been much better. So in a nutshell, and this isn't like strictly related and contained to renovations and renovation content, whatever your skill is or whatever you offer in the world, I feel it's important to ask those around you and above you for advice and ask them questions. I think this is especially important if you're in a kind of creative field where it's not as black and white what you're worth or what you can charge, because there is a risk that you can get kind of taken advantage of. I've personally found that other content creators are usually pretty happy to share advice and answer questions about this kind of thing because they don't want to see a fellow comrade underselling themselves. So it's kind of that a high tide raises all ships kind of thing. So those are my regrets with this renovation. If you've done a renovation or a makeover in your house and you have any disasters or regrets to share with us, please leave a comment so that we can all have a big laugh together. If you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate you leaving a like and subscribing for more. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.